reason I got into autism was because of the heartache in children and the children's parents. I never thought I'd have an interest in that, and way back 10 years ago, in a room with consultation with children, it just broke my heart. And to this day, I still see their pain, their agony, and the hurt. And it is the most amazing field to get into. It's tough, but it's so rewarding. These children are so special, so gifted. They're amazing. And, you know, if you've even had a half an interest, I'd encourage you to develop that and go in, because the burgeoning problems you'll see, the stats, we need more and more practitioners to do this. So the impact on parents is quite considerable. This study is propagating a 23.5% higher divorce rate. Other studies are not quite that high and saying it's a smaller effect on parents' marital relationships. I have to be a good boy and stand here. Other groups, their studies are saying that they need support programs, and that's so true. This is Deakin University. But the caregivers can have a healthy self-esteem, somewhat lower marital happiness, family cohesion, and family adaptability than the norms. So even if it's subtle, it's quite significant. There's another study here, negative effects and influences on marriages. So they're saying, again, it's small. I doubt that, really, from what my experience. And this is a bit of a dramatic one that can even shorten your telomeres, the stress of all this. I remember way back in my early days of having one parent coming home and not wondering where her husband was, and found him in the garage, hung himself. Now, he survived with some damage, but you know, that's just one case of what can happen. You know, it's just an overwhelming stress and pressure on these parents who do an amazing job, and so many, particularly the mothers and sometimes the dads, are up all night studying on the computers, trying to find answers. I call them the PhD mothers. So they're constantly seeking help. And back in the early days when it started, there wasn't much help around. Of course, if we've met one child with autism, we've only met one child with autism. Of the many autisms that we see, they're all individually different. There's an umbrella of conditions, of course. They're the most gorgeous children with the most amazing potential. They are so gifted, so savantish, and they just warm your heart. They really do. They're distressed, they're in trouble, they're pain, they're inflamed, they're not retarded, they're brilliant little, they're just Einstein's just waiting to happen. We've seen the stats, it's just climbing all the time. This is going to be very fast, I warn you. They are the yellow canaries, like chronic fatigue patients, picking up all the things there. This is an oversimplification of what's going on. The majority are undermethylators, as you're probably aware. 30 to 40% can have pyrroles as well. There's some genetics that can influence it, but they're not the major part. Epigenetic effects is big. Some of the other biomarkers there, you should have all these in your notes, so I'm sorry about the moving pictures. Paracetamol can't be underestimated, the harm that it does, both in utero and early childhood, infancy. Effects on the liver, the glutathione, massive effect. Okay, so electromagnetic frequencies, as we've heard, incredible effect on these children, affecting neurotransmitters, their sleep, their mood, affecting mitochondria, and so forth. There's a huge autoimmunity pressure, and the Th2 shift is huge. The effects of antibiotics, as we've heard, the toxins in the environment, just massive. The old stats of 256 chemicals in cord blood or breast milk, So it's probably much higher now these days. Some of the other issues there, deficiencies, soy, which is nasty and it can mimic what dairy does to these children. Some of the other issues going on. So this is starting in Stephanie Seneff's work, relating in her first paper about glyphosate. Roundup, of course, is amplified. So it's doing a lot of chelation of nutrients, particularly cobalt, manganese. It's affecting so much of functions in the body. That was the paper. And all the effects that it's doing. So there's so myriad effects on the body, just one after the other, of knocking things out. Just a terrible, terrible thing. Some of the features it's doing. Interesting little graph there with autism and the glyphosate usage. Also aluminium and mercury. Aluminium is such a nasty neurotoxin, creating so much inflammation, microglial activation and autoimmunity in the brain. And if it's in nanoparticle form, which is commonly given to people, that's so destructive. There's so many features happening through this. So you just read those notes later. You see how cobalt's so important, of course, and cobalamin, and the heme, the iron, both being affected. So it's a huge oxidative stress issue as well, and excitatory of the NMDA receptor, peroxidase of the lipids. The ammonia increase, and the effects on the mitochondria. The manganese, the glutathione effect, and the iron effect. It's disrupting all these things, disrupting the Krebs cycle. It's just cumulative. So some of the things with TH2 shift, antibiotics, paracetamol, certain injections, pesticides, elevated cortisol. So as we say, most of these kids are undermethylated, got huge sulfation problems, which is affecting their digestion, the gut barrier, the liver. It's reducing their GAGs, weakening their tight junctions. Mercury, ethyl mercury, thimerosal, still out there, you know, Chlorsic drops have got ethyl mercury, thimerosal in them, still going straight to the brain. So some of the early research, of course, with Deef and Jill James, all the issues going on. And Naveau's work there, the cell damage response that we've heard about before. This is the old work of Mary Megson, a wonderful paediatrician from America, and was her linking of the evidence that pointed to this G-alpha protein blockade, which is partly genetic, but then also the pertussis toxin being the second agent to cause the blockade. So it's affecting a lot of things in the body, and I'll show you shortly. So often the children with severe autism are in a world of shape and colour. They do not see 3D, they're only in 2D. And so we need to help this G-alpha protein to start repairing that. So we see that G-alpha protein here. It's a co-link with muscarinic 1 receptor, and that's what the vagus nerve is doing. So if they've got dysfunction knockout, which a lot of these kids have got, the vagus nerve and the G-alpha 1 protein, they've got massive effects happening at their gates, and that's allowing calcium to keep flooding through into the cells, so that there's a channelopathy happening there. Instead of being an on and off switch, it's actually flooding the cells. So we need these things up here to try and block that and switch it off so it can work a bit more in a regular pattern. So it's a 7-prong receptor, and you see the pertussis toxin here happening on the I3 receptor there. And there's some of the things that's going to happen when the I3 receptor is affected. Interesting symptoms, aren't they? And some of the important immune aspects of it. Okay, so bethanechol has always been, I've always been passionate about using bethanechol. I don't use it all the time, but it's actually a mimic of those muscarinic 1 receptors. So it's actually sort of having the effect of replacing what we're not getting from that parasympathetic effect. So the sit back, relax, focus, digest, and empty. So it helps empty the bowel. It's going to give us stomach acid. It's going to tighten the cardiac sphincter so we don't reflux anymore. It's going to help the pancreas to work properly. It's going to move the bowel. So it's a pretty good thing all around. Just watch it in asthmatics, but otherwise it's quite safe. You start low and go slow, as is in everything else. So there are other metabolic effects going on here in autism, of course. Some of Randy Beck's work that we heard some years back, certainly the EEG, if they're getting poor cohesion, and there's a lot of red inflamed areas going on, big changes in brainwave patterns in these children. That's from Jim Newbrander, some of his summaries of what's going on with the ASD as far as the EEG goes. Some of the other metabolic effects which we saw before, just a few things. Big issue about glutathione leading through with glutamine. That's what we've got to be aware with the food. If we don't have magnesium B6 to convert that from that glutamate to come across into GABA, we're going to have some problems. Okay. So the calmodulin, which we think about in certainly strep, these infections stimulate calmodulin. Other infections involved often as well. Cerebral folate deficiency syndrome, Resinol and Fry did this work. Certainly related to dairy, and the worst dairy is actually camel milk, even though it's been a bit popular at times. It's the most damaging in that regard. And certainly we have to use reasonably high dose activated folates to try and counteract that. There's major deterioration of the brain otherwise. Woody McGuinness, has been famous with his research and concentration on pyrroles, but also developed this theory about this small nucleus in the basal, the brain stem, which has some very interesting things affecting parasympathetic and all sorts of features affecting the vagus nerve as well. So it's really quite a plausible argument as well. There's a number of things to think about. So we know the gut immune brain issues, the gut flora, a couple of papers there affecting the brain function, the importance of the microbiome, all the neurotransmitters, which are vastly bigger than as you've heard in the brain, and then the immune system coming from the gut, especially when it's leaky, through the immune system going up to the microglia, which is, I call the third brain, as well as the brain being in the gut as well. And then the vagus nerve, 80% of its neural traffic is upwards. So it's an afferent rather than 20% efferent coming down. A couple of other recent papers on this area. So the gut microbiome is vital in these children. That's what strep, if you haven't seen Henry Butt's plates in Melbourne. So the blue being Enterococcus or Streptococcus as an overgrowth of aerobes. Of course, we know the effects on that and the brain. It's tragic when you see these kids. We've had a couple of children who were taking knives to their parents. They're quite delusional. I've got an older teenager, been in 3 mental institutions with nasogastric tube, who was not anorexic, it was abscess strep, believing that all food was contaminated. And so she just can't. A very bright girl, extremely disturbing on the brain. The strep is one of my biggest enemies. I'm fighting it all the time. And I'm always looking for newer ideas. Of course, it is a big D-lactate former, which hurts the mitochondria. A lot of probiotics out there do have D-lactate strains, so we should always go for non-D-lactate strains. E. coli, as long as it's not in the bladder and it's not enteropathic, is an amazing hard worker for us. It's a great friend, making amino acids, CoQ10, vitamin K. It works very hard. And it also, because of that, allows our bowel to move. That's what it should plate on the aerobes as E. coli. So it's often decimated. Just be aware of some of the prebiotics. They actually depress it. Henry Butt believes the E. coli depression is often due to viral bacteriophages, actually knocking them off. Bacteroides is another big friend of ours, so it digests vegetables. And that can be often depleted as well. Very important to try and restore these numbers. Get the good guys up, keep the bad guys down. Some Clostridia are okay and pretty tame, and some are nasty. Often the nasty ones have that paint stripping smell. It's just, evacuate the house. It's not pleasant. Okay, I rarely treat with antibiotics. That's an older slide of mine. Mostly use other remedies these days. And emptying the gut. Must empty the gut. Most of these kids, they can block the toilet and still have massive fecal retention going on. Okay. Just a few slides there. So that's just a bit of an overview of the gut flora, which is just reiterating what I've said. Looking at the probiotics, so making wise choices in that regard. Saccharomyces boulardii is another lovely agent. Very rarely upsets people. It's so calming and helpful to the whole gut cells, increasing secretory IgA. It inhibits Clostridia and Candida, so it's a good friend. It inhibits biofilm to some degree as well. And there was comment this morning about, is there really biofilm? Well, that's biofilm. It's an amazing construction. It's a real thing. Your calculus around your teeth show you've got biofilm. That's calcified biofilm. It's really harmful on the gut wall barrier. The quantum sensing, so transmitting this information, particularly antibiotic resistance. So it does a lot of damage, these biofilms. So we do need to break them to release it. And the trouble is we can't break them all. And that's why I said I'm 100% man about foods, because there'll always be a remnant. You could treat with everything you know, and you will never get rid of every single bit of strap in the gut. You'll never break every biofilm. And it just takes one little indiscretion to reignite and inflame it again. And if you've seen flares with Pandas or PANS and seen how ugly and frightening that is, you don't want to do that. And using enzymes particularly, breaking down the biofilm. So this is real stuff. So abnormal carbohydrate digestion, often particularly in their small gut. Lots of changes going on. So all the things you've heard about this weekend affecting our microbiome, our gut. Yeah. And wrong advice. That's not subtle, is it? Okay. The gut wall, really important. And you know all this stuff, surely. So both memory cells, dendritic cells, actually putting pseudopod, feeling bacteria in foods, sending all that information back to the server, which is getting back to the brain, both indirectly and directly, either through the vagus nerve or directly through the immune system. So within a minute or so, I presume, You eat something you shouldn't be, that you're reactive to. So your spleen, your liver, all your white cells in your bloodstream, and 1/3 of our brain, the microglia, light up like a Christmas tree and say, why did you do that to me? So being on your best behaviour is important. So tight junctions there are very important, that we're not leaking. You know, we'll know about Fasano and his Harvard work about gluten. And so we've got the leaky gut, the leaky brain, and of course the leaky vagina in adults. Still can't get over that. So these tight junctions, extremely important. Look what the body's got. We've been gifted with so many things here. The design is amazing to try and hold these tight junctions together. And you just take a bit of gluten and the zonulin will just make them part. And so that leakiness happens for hours. And that's in most people, Fasano believes. Just a couple of slides about autism there. So zinc carnosine is really, really powerful. And that's not to get zinc or carnosine. Though I did have one child really spoke well with taking zinc carnosine, which was a surprise. L-glutamine, yes, sure, as long as you've got your B6 and magnesium and everything else. But yeah, I rarely use it because of the glutamate issue. Vitamin D is extremely important in this area. Quercetin is another thing, which is powerful here as well. And some of the good strains of probiotics. I also use homeopathics to help heal and seal the gut wall. And that's happening both in the gut and all the mucous membranes. So getting the right sulfurs, getting the right sulfurs to help your gags as well, really important. And just even doing the Epsom salts baths is going to give you some sulfur by doing that, as well as sulfur amino acids, taurine, and so forth. The gingers, the ginger family, Cliffy Hawkins' work, showing how that can break down and digest gluten. He believes it so much, he says you can eat gluten and just use my products, but I don't believe that. So food is one of the most important things. So all first comers, I say, we've got 3 foundational things to really get you on the right track before just looking for that magic bullet, the magic pill that's going to fix your child. We've got to get the right foods for that individual child, and there's so many things I'll show you in a slide shortly. All the different variables which can make it extraordinarily tricky, and that's where the art form comes, trying to tailor that diet that suits that individual child, then healing and sealing the gut wall, it's not leaking anymore, and then correcting the gut flora. So there are 3 foundational bedrock things. If we don't get those right and keep them right, and that's the real trick, especially if the kids get older and want to swap lunches or they want to be like their peers, that's where it gets hard. So you've got to get the message into the kid's brain that they take ownership of that message. That, you know, the young ones, I talk about smart and dumb food. So don't say dumb food to your friends, but, you know, we want to have that smart food that makes particularly boys smarter, stronger, and taller. So they've got some hook why they're going to be doing this. They want to outperform their mates on the field or whatever. They've got to have a reason for doing that. And so remember, foods can heal or harm, calm or alarm. And that's a really important message. Jeff Bland uttered those words which have stuck with me forever. And it's so true. The power of food is incredible. Fructose is my 3rd enemy after gluten and dairy, but I'd also include soy and maize. So fructose is just a horrible thing. The body just says, what am I going to do with this stuff? So it turns it into fat around the liver. So it's the #1 cause of fatty liver, raises uric acid in adults. It's the #1 cause of insulin leptin resistance, acidity, inflammation, grows all the bugs, the bad weeds in the gut flora. So there's no end to it. The inflammasomes that it's making, it's just no good. So my 6 tenets for food, to try and simplify it, see what you think. 3 no's, 3 goods. Nothing white, nothing sweet, nothing processed, nothing white, nothing sweet, masses of greens, great protein, that's clean, pasture-fed, organic, and good oils. So if I think those 6 tenets work for you, use them. It's the power of food. And that's where it should be grown. Sorry, Layla, I'm not a vegetarian. So some of the tricky parts of food, if you're trying to manage all these things, you've got kids with multiple issues with these things, oxalates or amines or histamines, it really makes it very difficult. It's not insurmountable, so don't let that balk you again. Have a good nutritionist that can guide you. You can't do it all yourself, okay? I'll leave that as a reference for you. Low oxalate diet, some of the other phenolics, of course, the fermented things, bear in mind they are histamine foods. Okay. So we're trying to keep down the weeds, and we're trying to encourage the good flora, because that's what we need. And we don't want to use just gluten-free, casein-free, because otherwise they sometimes turn into a rice or other grain carbohydrate addicts. Oil's really, really important. Coconut oil is salicylate. There's some issues with some kids, but having the right fats and oils, very important. Brains, if we could get them readily, is actually amazing with phospholipids. That would be good as well. Just don't tell them they're eating it. High fat content is really important. Drinking lots of water, keeping hydrated. That was a good paper that came out 2 years ago, I think. The final question about fats. So the diets, you've got to work around with the families and the children, and keeping on the right track is so important. The bone broths, we would prefer just to use bone stocks for 2 or 3 hours, maybe just 2 hours. Of course, 24-hour broths can have a lot of glutamates and a lot of lead coming out of the bones. Just bear in mind that. Removing the harmful agents in the home is really important, especially EMFs, all the wrong chemicals, cleaning agents and so forth. We've heard that. So it's so important. So sort of some of the keynote points there is just cleaning up the house, cleaning up the food, cooking right way, having the right bacteria, just watching. Digestion's so key. So most of these kids got low hydrochloric acid, so they're not digesting their food to start with. So they're not going to absorb their minerals. So magnesium, zinc and iron. That's one of the major reasons why that's going to be low. The vagus nerve, we've talked about that, it's so important. Okay, epilepsy, some of the things that can help there in that regard. Autism is treatable. That's the Bill Walsh statement. And recovery is possible. There is always hope. And thank you.